All right, folks. Well, let's go ahead and get started for today's webinar. So again, Luke Sanders, TSM here with Snyk. Wanted to cover, I guess I'm just calling it starting strategies. So where do you start once you've purchased Snyk? Being a TSM, it's a very common question of, hey, we purchased, now what, right? You have this tool, maybe you know why you got it and you're not quite sure where to start applying it. So I thought we'd talk through a little bit of that today, covering, things to consider, basically questions to ask yourself here. How and where should you start? There's two kind of common points that you can start resolving vulnerabilities. We'll cover a couple of those today. Dev workflows and buy-in. We'll look at a workflow attached to one of those here from this second bullet point. And then getting buy-in, like what are some good ways to make sure you're spinning up this program, you're getting the developers involved in using the tool, and then we'll open it up for Q&A at the end. Feel free to leverage the chat. I think Maddie will be keeping an eye on that, and then we can circle back to that at the end as well. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive in. Questions to ask yourself up front. Now, you might be coming in, maybe you're coming in with an AppSec program already in place. That's great. Maybe you're just buying this tool. You didn't really have that in place beforehand. Either way, these are all kind of common questions to think through in no particular order. So I'm going to probably just go left to right here across my screen. So, do we know what needs to be integrated first, right? Maybe that's business critical apps. Maybe this is, replacing some other tooling. You're moving over to Snyk. You need to make sure that the apps that are covered with that tool are now covered and being monitored inside of Snyk. Maybe it's a new application that you're launching. It might be a new web app that's getting launched and it's going live in 3 weeks. And you need to make sure that you're scanning, what's there, where your baseline is, and you kind of have that threat landscape. Who is our internal virtual team is another one to kind of think through. And this could be people on the implementation team. I think I had stakeholders here originally, didn't really like the way that sounded. It could be people that need to be involved during implementation. It could be, another question that's not on here is how are we going to log in? So if you want to leverage SSO, that might be a different team that has to get involved. And if you're a large financial institution, there might be processes in place to get their time. There may need to be a 2-week wait, and maybe they want a form filled out a particular way. So kind of think through some of this stuff. I'm kind of going all the way to the right in terms of who is going first. Maybe you want to have that particular dev lead involved up front. So you're talking through this and they're involved in implementation. They know what Snyk is and how it's going to work and how it's going to affect them as well. Another one here is how do we want to segment our work? And this kind of leads to something Snyk specific. And if you don't know what this is yet, you will soon enough. It's one of the first things you want to figure out when you're implementing is what is our account structure? And so in Snyk, we have your group as your top level, then orgs is really what you want to think through how you set those up, and then projects underneath that. And projects is anything you can scan. So it's your manifests, it's your code, it's your containers, it's your IAC files. And in terms of segmenting, so you want to think about, who needs to have access to what? And another common one is how do you want to report on this? So different ways to do that. You might want to do it by product. You might want to do it by team. If you do it by team, it's very easy to report on team A, B, and C and see what their numbers look like. You can do it by product. And then further, you can add custom tags to each project for each team. And other ways you can kind of get to that data inside of reporting. But it's just a way to think about who needs access to what. It's all kind of tied to the org level. You might not want developer A being able to see team C's vulnerabilities and things like that. So it's just something you want to kind of work through. There's guides online at training.snyk.io as well that'll talk through that. I think we even have a short video explaining it, things to think about, pros and cons of each one. And then is there a dev team that should go first? So think of some friendlies. Is there a group that is interested in application security and maybe they've expressed some interest in getting involved, or maybe they're tied to that particular critical app? Typically, you want to start there, work with them, get that buy-in, see how it's going, and then you kind of continue to roll it out to the rest of your teams. How are we resolving vulns today? So maybe you're not, right? Maybe you don't have a formal process. But this can help you kind of figure out how to integrate with that particular team that you're working with, making it easy to fit into their workflows. We integrate across the SDLC. I'll show a slide here later on, kind of walking through what each one of those is. But it helps to kind of understand how you're working today, what that end state's going to be, to figure out where you can plug this in and make it easier for your developers to adopt. And another one, to be totally honest and upfront during implementation. What kind of freaks you out? Is it timelines? You know, are you replacing some tooling and, oh my God, we have to have this in 30 days. Can we do it? Is it adoption? Are you worried that, you know, you had some tools in place previously, maybe you weren't really using them like you should? Just all different things to think about. You know, buy-in, things like that, just kind of understanding, being honest with the team helps you figure this out and kind of get over those hurdles quickly. And then what does success look like? I always pitch this as, hey, we're 12 months down the road. If I'm going to look back and say, was that successful, right? What does that need to be? Is it, you know, you want 100% SCA coverage? I've seen that, right? That was a goal that someone needed to consider it successful. I've seen, you know, we need to have this, and once we have 0 criticals, we're going to see that as successful. It's a subset of apps. It's a few criticals that you need in. What does that look like? What are the metrics you're going to track to where you'll feel comfortable taking this to your leadership and saying, hey, we did this. Here's how it's going. Here's how it's trending. This worked out really well. Not to say that these are the only things you should think about as you're implementing, but these are ones I think that come up fairly regularly, and it's just important to kind of get ahead of, and it'll really help you, I think, kind of tee up this implementation and make sure that it's going to go as smooth as possible. And then thinking about a couple common ways to start fixing vulnerabilities, there's really 2 ways that I will recommend and that other folks will recommend here. It's starting with your criticals, or it's preventing new issues. And so if you start with your criticals, it's all about the low-hanging fruit. So it's finding the criticals that are fixable and starting there. You know, maybe you want to set some goals around that. I've had customers say, you know what, we're going to start with our criticals. The team has 12 months. In 12 months, we're going to start implementing SLAs. And so they really wanted to make sure they had that runway where people were comfortable getting in and resolving vulnerabilities before those SLAs were attached to them. I mentioned on the previous slide, I've had a customer say, hey, we need 0 criticals. And that was their goal. I think they got down to 1. They weren't vulnerable, so they ignored it. I don't always think that's super attainable. That's hard to do, right? To have 0 criticals, but that was their goal. Or maybe it's a 10% reduction in criticals over the next 6 months. Whatever it is, I think this is a good starting point here. And if you guys have seen any of the Snyk reporting tools, this is just a quick snapshot. I can look at this particular organization. I can say, hey, show me what's open, show me what's fixable, and show me what's critical. And then it's going to filter these down to give you an idea of what you're looking at there. You can see the criticality here. You can see our Snyk priority score. If you don't know what that is, you will soon enough. It's a way of adding some context on top of the severity. And so maybe I know, hey, this is the highest scoring critical that we have in this Docker file. It's fixable. Let's go ahead and get this resolved and get this count kind of trending down. Very, very common point to start. And the other one is fixing new stuff, right? So preventing new issues from coming in. There's nothing pretty about a PR check. So I kind of just put our mascot over here to the side, Patch, just kind of drinking some coffee, because in a way it's easy mode, right? Like you just turn this on inside of the UI with these 2 here. So I can say, hey, you know what? I want to scan for open source and licensing issues, and I want to scan for SAST as well, code analysis. And then anytime, as long as this repo is being monitored by Snyk, anytime someone raises a PR, in your SCM of choice, it's going to show you here. I believe this is just a GitHub snapshot. It'll show you what it failed. It does not prevent you from merging, so you can still merge, but it's going to fail the check. And this is just failing the open source check, saying, hey, we found some issues. You click the link, takes you back to Snyk. You can see all about it. You can see what it is. You can see where to fix it. And you can kind of tweak the rules here too. So this is higher criticals for open source, and you can say, I only want to fail this if there's a fix, because maybe you don't want to just fail something if there's nothing you can really do about it, right? And then for code, we have severity of high, medium, and low. So here we're just looking for highs. So you'll see if you turn all these on, you'll see your open source check, you'll see your license check, and you will see your Snyk code check here as well. If you needed to prevent things from being merged, you can look at branch protection inside of your SCM, but by default, this is not going to stop you from merging this. It's just going to fail this check. So very common ways to get going. In general, it's one or the other that organizations will start with. And in terms of workflows and buy-in, I don't know if you guys have seen this yet, but really just wanted to show you kind of where we can implement across your SDLC. We have all the way into an IDE plugin, so you can click a play button. You know, we partner VS Code. Any major player out there, we're going to have a plugin for. You can scan it, see your issues. It's going to take you to the file, take you to the line, highlight what the problem is, show you some example fixes that it's pulling down from GitHub for other people have done to get those issues resolved. CLI scans as well, if that's where you wanted to scan. I think the easiest way and the most common way for people to integrate up front is this SCM integration. So it's pulling in your GitHub repos, it's pulling in your Bitbuckets, things like that. It's easy to do through the UI. You set up the integration, you just click add projects, click it, and it's going to pull it inside of Snyk. And this is what we just talked about. So fix when merging PRs, you can enable that. In general, don't turn this on up front. We'll look at a slide here later on, kind of stepping you through our recommended approach. So you want to start small and just start finding the issues first. But this is something you can turn on when you're ready. You can turn it on for an org. You can turn it on for a project. You can start really, really narrow with these PR checks, get people used to it, and then kind of expand it out from there. This is another one where some people like it, some people don't want it. There's automated fixes, so auto fix PRs, where it's going to find an issue over a certain score, and it's just going to automatically raise the PR for you. So Snyk will open those for you. It's not a developer doing it. So I think that's where you're either going to like it or you're not going to like it, depending on what your workflow is. There is dependency upgrade PRs as well that's available across some SCMs, where if we can upgrade it, we're going to go ahead and raise that for you. And we can limit it to a certain number so it's not flooding you with PRs there. And then you can go all the way to your build pipeline. Super customizable, but also the most complex one that's out there. There's plugins for various tooling. There's Circle CI orbs and things like that. Anything you can run inside of the CLI, you can essentially run inside of your pipelines. You can block builds. You can gate if that's what you wanted to do. Hey, you know what? I want to fail this if it's a critical and it's fixable. You can do that inside of your pipelines. It's not uncommon to integrate across different points here. You can have your SCM integrations. You can also have your pipelines. It doesn't necessarily have to be one or the other, but there are some caveats to that when you go down that path. And then all the way to the right, so you can fully monitor stuff inside of production. So you can put a Kubernetes monitor out there. It's going to see what workloads are actually running in production. It's going to tie that into your container registry and raise issues that you have actually deployed. So all the way across, wherever you guys are most comfortable working, we can do it. And it's all about kind of integrating that with your developers and whatever workflow they kind of feel most comfortable with, and whichever one works with their particular stack. And then in terms of workflows, so this is going back to the PR check slide. This is a very common workflow. You can make these your own, but it's essentially, hey, you know what? I'm going to make some changes. I'm going to create a PR. Does it fail? It does. If it can be fixed, I'm going to go back through this flow until I can merge it into Git. This is the one where you're going to have a little bit of leeway on the security side and determine what you want to do. If something can't be fixed, what is your exception policy going to look like? Who is going to handle that? You can ignore issues from the UI. You can restrict it to administrators only so that you don't have developers just kind of going in there and ignoring things. Whatever makes the most sense for you, but this is the one I think where it'll be a little bit different, and the development side is going to be pretty much the same when you're looking at these PR checks. And then just kind of things to think about. So be thoughtful with the rollout. We have a recommended approach here. I have this on the next slide so we can look at this and see what that looks like. But it's about getting visibility first, right? Getting your projects in, getting those critical apps, getting the first one that needs to be in Snyk, getting that inside, seeing what it looks like, understanding, what the vuln counts are. Then you want to move into buy-in. So start with the friendly, get them involved, see what's working for them. Hey, how do you guys work? Understand those workflows, see where it makes the most sense to plug in, understand their stack. So depending on what languages and package managers they're working with, it's going to depend on your best integration points. Like, for example, if you have Maven, maybe it's better in the CLI. It should have fairly good parity between CLI and SCM, but you can really fine tune what you're doing and looking for with that CLI integration. Fixing new issues, we looked at that one as well. And then from there, you can start looking at your backlog. And even going back to one of the first slides of things that make you nervous during implementation, this is a very common one too. Maybe it's some legacy applications and you do not want to know what's there. You're scared of how many vulnerabilities are going to come back. Stop the new stuff first and then start chipping away at that backlog where it makes sense. And then maybe you optimize from there and you get into your pipelines. It's important to communicate as well. So again, going back to the link that Maddie dropped in, making sure your teams know what's coming, when, and why. There is messaging you can take and copy for emails, for Slack. Hey, we're implementing this new tool. Here is why we're doing it. Here are the stages and when it's coming and when we expect you guys to do this. There's all sorts of training there for developers as well. So if they want to see how to leverage this tool, that's available, that's out there. And dates, let them know when. I think that's always helpful. And then awareness and training sessions. I've run some, and I think what I've found has worked is starting with the awareness with your development leads and letting them know, hey, here's what this is, here's how it's going to work, here's kind of what we're expecting. How do you want to introduce this to your teams? And then going in and having some training sessions for the developers, right? Showing them that IDE plugin, showing them what the UI looks like if they're going to be using the UI. And showing them what that CLI is going to look like as well and how to find, prioritize, and fix those issues. And then involve your teams early. So, AppSec is going to be responsible for the tooling. Developers are going to use it, understand how they work, understand what, optimized state looks like for them, understanding their stack, what the package managers, where they want to integrate. Are they responsible for containers? Are you looking at that as well? And that way it'll kind of show you the best way to implement here. And then moving on to the recommended approach. So expanding on that previous slide, this works really well to get things up and running. So what's business critical, what's onboarded, what's scanned, what your issues are, who's going to start using it. And then you just kind of move on from there. Cool, let's start working with these early adopters, with the friendlies out there. Make sure that maybe we want to start fixing vulnerabilities earlier in the SDLC. We want to introduce that IDE plugin. There's no wrong time to introduce that and get people out there and fixing things. Really kind of building that sentiment, making sure that people are using it. It's easy. In terms of feedback we hear, it should be faster for you guys to run these scans, unless you're scanning some massive mono repo, maybe that'll take an hour or so. But in general, it's pretty quick, right? You hit play and it's going to give you results back in minutes. And then you can look at that inside of your IDE and see what the problem is, see where it is, see where it's fixed, how to fix it. And even with that, advice that you see, we're looking for open source for that next closest version that doesn't have that vulnerability. So we're not going to put you on the most recent package that's out there because maybe that's going to cause some problems. And then you want to start preventing new stuff. So we already walked through some of the PR checks. That's pretty common for folks to do and a very common starting point to stop new stuff from coming in. Then you can start reporting on that. You can see, hopefully you're going down and to the right, and you can show that to your leadership team and kind of show them what you're doing. And then start looking at remediation progress, see who's fixing things. Is it a training thing? Do you have certain kinds of vulnerability types that maybe are climbing up? Another one is learn.snyk.io, where you can go in, you can see, hey, here's this particular issue, here's how it's exploited, and here's how I fix it. And it's going to show you in your language. So it's whatever language you're working with. There's several that are out there, but it's a good way to go. There's an OWASP top 10 training track. There's a Snyk top 10 training track. where we look at the top 10 that we see across our customer base that might differ a little bit from the OWASP top 10. And then all the way, then you're going to optimize from there. So maybe that's pipelines, and you know what is out there. Everything is in at that point. Everything is scanned. Everything is monitored. You know, there's accountability. You know, you can go from that enforcers to enablers. I always think another thing that's important too is that top level buy-in. If you are on your own, it's harder to kind of get this out there. But if you have that executive buy-in saying, hey, security is super important, that'll help get this out and really understand how you guys want to kind of start attacking these vulnerabilities and making those counts go down. So hopefully that was helpful. Gave you guys some things to think about as you start working through and thinking about how you want to implement this. How do you want to get started? Maybe it's some things you weren't thinking of coming in, but any questions that you guys